any questions that you have. I'll do my best to answer them as well as I can. If I know the answers, I will of course tell you them. If I don't know the answers, I'll make up a good lie so you won't know the difference. Now, how is your English? How long have you been learning it?
I don't know.
Very long.
Quite long? Okay. Do tell me if I'm speaking too quickly or if you don't understand. Let me know and I'll say it. There is some really boring but very obvious health and safety to get through first. So first of all, no matter how exciting the tour is, please don't jump around the boat. Stay seated for me. Also keep your arms and your legs inside the boat for me. We've got some big fish in the sea. I don't want you coming back with any less fingers than you came out with. Also, we're going under some low bridges, so please mind your head. If I shout duck, I'm not showing you the local wildlife. Okay? If it looks like you're going to hit your head, then I'll shout duck.
And if there will be any live duck, animal duck.
I think that you can probably see that for yourself, I think. I don't think you need me to point that out. So this is the first site on our tour, guys. It's called the King's Bridge. It was built in two sections. The lower part there was built in 1134. And it was extended on either side in 1769. Now that makes it the oldest working road bridge still in use in the UK today. And incredibly, up until 1973, this bridge took all of the traffic between London and Dover. So just imagine how many cars and trucks that would have been. Now this building here is the East Bridge Hospital. Again, built in two parts. The right, the beige building, was built in 1180 and extended. It wasn't. Not that time anyway. Have you lost anyone yet?
Not yet.
Okay, good stuff. Still got half a tour though. You might be going.
Well, that's my story, I'm sticking to it.
The East Bridge Hospital, built in 1180 and then extended in 1796, was originally built for pilgrims. They would come from all over England and Europe to worship in the shrine of St Thomas of Beckett in the cathedral. Now they would be given a little space on the floor, they would be given a bit of food, nothing much, but this was completely free. And this allowed hundreds and thousands of people from all over Europe to come and worship in the cathedral. Nowadays, it's used by a number of elderly people to worship in the shrines inside the hospital. The shrine of St Thomas of Beckett was destroyed in 1538. With it, lots of tourism in Canterbury disappeared. In the 18th century, it built back up again, and from then on, it was used by these elderly people.
I know.
Everyone's wearing it these days.
Now, has anybody been reading their guidebook? No one ever does. Can anyone then tell me what the name of this river is? I take it not. No, it's called the Stour. And it's one of 5 Stours in England. It's because Stour is Anglo-Saxon, the Old English, and it means fast-moving water. Now, it's not exactly that today, is it? It's quite slow. That's because at the other end of the river, there are floodgates that control the speed and the height of the water.
Let's go.
You'll be seeing those a little bit later. Hello, you.
Oh.
Is this one of your friends?
No.
Well, if it is, sell it back to them. Charge them £5 and give me 2, and then we'll be happy. So the Stour is 27 miles long, and I've been calling it a river, but actually this part is a canal. That means that it was built by people, and it was actually built by the Romans when they lived in Canterbury. They lived here around the year 0, around also the time that Jesus was born. Now, they dug this section of the river to remove flooding in the original section, which was over by Westgate, over sort of on that side of the town. And it also did the job of bringing fresh water and fresh fish into the town. Obviously the residents would drink and eat this, and local industry would use the flow of the water as energy. Mills and tanneries began to spring up. We'll be seeing a tannery a little bit later on, and a mill on the other end of the river. And they began, as I said, to use the energy and to dump their waste into the river. This made the river horrible and smelly and really unhygienic. However, as you can see now, it's very beautiful, and the government really does a good job of legislating against dumping into the river. Do you watch your head on this bridge? That is about the same size as my head. Call it the learning curve for a reason. Now just down there, the furthest building there is an old tannery. It's not in use today, of course, but as an example of what I was telling you about. And on the left and the right of the boat are quite good places for looking at fish. So keep an eye out. You get various types of fish. You get bream, as you can see over there. Freshwater trout, eels as well, pike, very big fish with very big teeth. And outside the town we also get otter families. I fancy a beer. Come on. Now this island here is called the Franciscan Island. It's also called the Black Friars Island. We call that after the people who used to live on it. Mate, do you want to tell them about this bit?
Yes. This island is the Black Friars Island, and it used to be the site of the Franciscan Priory. The Franciscan monks were followers of Saint Francis. They moved here in 1224, I think it was, and they were granted land here by the king here, but they were called the Black Friars because of the colour of their habits. They were very poor, and when they moved down, they were taken for beggars originally, and they were arrested and hauled up. And they managed to avoid being hung, and they displayed a great deal of humility. Because the chap he took off his belt and said, "If you take us for beggars, here is a halter with which to hang us," and that displayed a lot of humility, and so they got let off and granted this island.
So yeah, they did begin to build up their priory, which is their group of buildings by which to worship God. And after a while, Henry VIII came to power. Have you heard of Henry VIII? Yeah, very famous English king. Have you heard of the Reformation? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nods. Alright, cool. The Reformation was, of course, when he turned England from a Catholic country to a Protestant country, In doing so, he destroyed many of Canterbury's old historic buildings. The Franciscan buildings were some of these buildings as well. He destroyed all of them except for one, and that one building is that building down there. Do you see the building at the end? Yeah? Yes? No? Yes? Okay. That building, as I said, is the last remaining Franciscan building. It's called the Franciscan Chapel. Can anyone tell me why it's still there? Why didn't Henry's soldiers destroy it? Silence. No? Okay, no lateral thinking on this boat. It's there because it forms a bridge. It's a bridge over the river, and of course is very valuable. Bridges are hard to build, so Henry's soldiers were too lazy to destroy the bridge and have to build another non-religious bridge in its place. So as a result of their laziness, we have the best example of Franciscan architecture anywhere in the country in Canterbury to show you. And that makes me pretty happy. Mind your heads. Mate, what can you tell us about Assisi Cottage?
Assisi Cottage? Well, that was built about, wasn't it 150 years ago? It was, no, a lot longer than that. But it doesn't have very many windows, and that's because of William Pitt the Younger, he was Prime Minister of England for a short amount of time. I can't remember in what century, but he decided he was in charge of paying off Britain's war debts, and he thought a good way of doing that would be to invent some taxes. And so one tax he decided to invent was the window tax. And basically the idea was the bigger your house, the more windows you had, so the more tax you'd have to pay. And that was a sneaky way of taxing rich people. And so, but what clever people did was just fill in their windows. So that cottage there, you see, it's only got the one window on that side. That's an excellent example of a building from that period that was affected by that. And it's also where we get the phrase daylight robbery from.
In fact, that building's probably not a result of the window tax. If you go around to the other side, there are 5 windows on the other wall, and the building's actually only 1 room thick. So it's possibly not because of the window tax, but that does give you a good example of some of the stupid taxes that we've had in England. But in a bit of national pride, we're not the only country to have had some stupid taxes. The Russians, under Alexander the Great, had a tax on the length of their subjects' beards. They called it the beard tax. So I would pay the most tax out of anybody on the boat, including your teacher there. And I've got £36,000 of student debt. I don't think that's too fair. The site of Canterbury's first public toilet. It's basically just a wooden board over the river. And it worked very well for a number of years, up until a rather fat gentleman sat on the seat. He fell straight through and died in the water below. Probably the worst death in the entire world, I think. But the building on our right is much nicer. This beautiful Tudor building was built in the year 1534. After which group, Matt?
After it was the Huguenots.
Indeed. Who were the Huguenots?
They were from France and Belgium, and they moved to England to escape religious persecution. And they were famous for being highly skilled at weaving and textile work. So
they made very good cloth, and they started their industry here in Canterbury. Now over the next 300 years, hello. I don't like it when he smiles like that, it means he's planning something.
Right, I'm off. Can you tell us more about the game? Everybody ready?
Now over the next 300 years, they set up their industry here in Canterbury, and they were so good at making cloth that they had the best industry in the whole world until Indians found that they could make it for cheaper. They were so good for Canterbury's economy that at the end of those 300 years, at the height of their industry, the cathedral gave them a chapel inside the building, gave it to them for free, and even today, on a Sunday afternoon, you can get a service there completely in French. Now, am I speaking too fast?
No, no.
Okay.
We listen.
Sorry?
We listen.
Okay.
Okay.
Listening is one thing. Understanding?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same.
I see some nods, I see some...
There they are.
Do we have any singers on the boat? No? No one sings well?
No?
Oh, give us a show, please.
No, tak něco řekněte. Nebo zaspívejte.
Beautiful.
Jestli byl s česem.
Hodně mluv česu.
Jsi úplně nadechnutá.
The building to our right now is called the Marlow Theater. It's not very much now, it's being rebuilt for £27 million. Nothing really, is it? What up, Tom?
Do kamera.
Right, I'm going to keep on rowing, and Matt is going to tell you about these two buildings here.
These two buildings here, they're part of the Dominican Priory, and they were owned by a group of monks who were known as the Black Friars because of the colour of their clothes they chose to wear. And they were followers of Saint Dominic from Spain. And building on our right there, that's part of that. Nowadays, that's part of the King's School, which is one of the oldest schools in the entire of England. It's also one of the most expensive. I think a year there costs about £30,000, which is more than my entire student debt, which is quite extreme. Now, Black Friars, they were very, very rich. And that little orchard there used to be part of where they would grow the crops for making beer and cider and other stuff. So that's how they made most of their money, and they were very famous because they liked to burn people quite a lot. They liked to burn practically anyone they didn't like. But what's quite ironic about them is when King Henry VIII came along and conducted his Reformation, he burnt them. So that provided them with an ironic end, which is quite.
But the Dominicans also got their name from the Latin play on words Domini Carne. Domini Carne is Latin meaning hounds of God. And they literally went up and down the country burning anyone who disagreed with their particular understanding of the Bible. Now they were Catholics, which meant that if you were Protestant, they'd burn you. If you were Jewish, they'd burn you. If you weren't sure, you were agnostic, they'd burn you. If you were atheist, you didn't believe in God, they call you a witch and then burn you. They wrote a book called Malleus Magnificanum, which was basically a handbook on how to find and burn witches. And as Matt said, yep, they were active up until Henry VIII came to power, who ironically burned them.
I'm getting yet.
Where have you come from today?
Over there.
Oh really?
Yeah, we went up and round. We're in the car park over there.
Alright, cool.
We're out in Canterbury anyway.
Now over here we have the Floodgates that I was talking to you about earlier. They were made in 1820, so they're nearly 200 years old. Thinking about how old they were, that was before the Industrial Revolution, before large-scale cast iron manufacturing techniques were invented, so I think it shows how well they were made. Now they worked so well that when we opened all of the gates, the level of the water dropped by 2 feet in just 3 or 4 minutes. Their original task was to hold, or at least push water down that channel there, which held a water wheel, where the two ground pillars are there. And that wheel belonged to the Abbott's Mill, which was a bread mill, which meant that it was made of wood and entirely full of flour. And flour is very explosive. So in 1933, when somebody left their blowtorch on in their tea break, the whole building exploded. There was a huge fire. There's one. I know what's going to happen, and I'm trying to get out of the way.
Like a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dobře, ty budu mít Verču. Ty Pepu. No, Pepová hlava. No.
Now, when there was a fire, when the fire started in the mill burned for hours and hours, up until a beam of wood fell through the mill into the pub next door, which left the firefighters with a decision, didn't it? Do they save the mill, or do they save the pub? Well, the pub is still there. I think it was a good decision to make.
Ryba ti ukusá prst.
A jaká je voda?
Ne?
Už tam chtěla stačit prst.
Ty si máš tady?
Když jsem hodně vykoupala.
Taky bych si dal koupat.
Now these houses here would have been some of the least desirable houses in the city. This is because the river was very smelly, very polluted, and going through their back gardens would have made these very unhospitable houses. But of course now the river is very clean, so these are now some of the most desirable and most expensive houses in Canterbury. We worked out that it would take one of us boatmen rowing up and down this river every day for 120 years to buy one of those houses. Still, it's good to have a dream. As Matt said, this is now the King's School Arts Department. So that is art, apparently.
To je takový divný, ale se to vůbec nehodí do takového krásného starého.
To já no.
Že se mi to asi nehodí, že to má úplně tvár. Já si to nevím.
Now this building, the Marlow Theater, was named after a man called Christopher Marlow. Has anyone heard of Christopher Marlow? Okay.
Yeah, he was born here.
Yeah, okay, yeah, he was indeed born here. He was actually an actor. And he wrote plays for Queen Elizabeth I. He was also a number of other things. He was a drinker, he liked his fighting, his pub fighting, and he liked his poker. He was also a spy, and he went in and out the courts of Europe, finding out the information of what was going on there, and passing it back to Queen Elizabeth. Now he was killed in a pub fight in a town called Beckett in London with his own knife through his right eye, which he probably should have seen coming. But he didn't, and this was quite suspicious. He was due to be hung 3 days later, or he was due to be tried anyway, probably hung, for treason. Now treason is where you start spying against your own country. And he would have known that he would have been hung for it. So, a story developed, and this story says that he faked his death and he moved to Europe. He moved to Europe, and in Europe he kept on writing plays under the name of one of his good friends, a man called William Shakespeare. Now you've all heard of William Shakespeare, I imagine, yeah? But no one's heard of Christopher Marlowe? It's very strange because when they were both alive, Marlowe was much more famous than Shakespeare was. He was better educated, he went to school, his grammar was better, his knowledge was better, but nowadays no one's heard of him. I find it very strange. Canterbury is of course entirely made out of stone. This stone, at least the cathedral, is made out of a stone called Norman flagstone. This comes from Normandy in France, and it would come down this river on big boats called barges, towed by horses. These horses would walk alongside on tow paths until they came to a bridge like this. When they did, the horses couldn't go under, so they would have to go around the bridge. And the boatmen had to find another way to get the boats under. They came up with a technique called legging it. Has anyone heard of legging it? No? In which case, I'll show you how to do it now.
Oh yeah.
Hope you enjoyed getting a nice video of my bottom, sir. I quite liked it though, because that door there and that one were the fire escapes into the river. I think that's quite good. The building used to be a Cromwellian iron forge. During the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell put 300 horses in the cathedral itself, and he used this building here to make the swords and the shields for his army. So if you look over there at the black mark on the wall just past the window, yeah? That's where the original fire furnace used to be. So you can tell I'm not lying to you. Sorry.
Hello.
Hello, John. 5.
You having fun?
Feel the excitement, the pensive excitement infusing days.
Taky úplně groggy.
Say last, Joe.
The final sight on our tour today is this, the ducking stool. Modelled by Tom. Oh yeah. That's one sexy man. One sexy ducking stool. Now the ducking stool was used for two uses throughout history. The first one was for nagging housewives or women who talked too much. Or fell asleep on people's boats. Now they would be tied into that chair and they would have their heads put underwater for 3 or 4 seconds. This wouldn't be enough to harm them, but given how nasty the water was, when their heads did go underwater, it was hoped that they would learn the lesson of keeping their mouths shut. The second use for the ducking stool was during the witch trials. Witch trials, of course, made famous in Salem, Massachusetts. If a woman was considered a witch, for instance, well, is anyone left-handed?
Yep.
1, 2, okay. Well, you're definitely going in anyway. So we'd see whether or not he was a witch. We'd tie him in the chair and put him underwater for 15 minutes. Now he'd probably die. But this was a good thing, because obviously he wasn't a witch. He hadn't used his magic to save his life, and he was a Christian. So, he'd be buried in the cathedral, and his soul would go to heaven. He'd be written a letter of apology, which he was a bit too dead to read. But if he lived, then he was really in trouble, because he would be taken down. Obviously, he'd be a witch. So we'd cut off his arm, cut off his leg, and hang him by the neck until he was dead. Except in Salem, Massachusetts in America, where this was a lot more common, they'd take him down, he'd be very cold and very wet from having been in the river for 15 minutes, and we'd warm him up on a nice big bonfire and burn him at the stake. Sound good?
Oh.
So.
Jsem dodělal. To se takový vedro zítra.
And with that happy story, guys, ends our tour. Hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah.
And we're going to wait a few minutes on the river. Not a bad